Out with the old, in with the new! Time to move on to my ideas for stuff that was introduced in Generation 5, or in a few cases, including this next one, that was greatly enhanced in Generation 5. Number 10, Nerf Permanent Weather. This is probably gonna be the most popular idea ever. I don't think anyone's gonna disagree with that, to be perfectly honest. So the way permanent weather starts now, you probably already know it. In fact, you definitely do, but just in case you don't, let's go over the basics. When you send out a permanent weather inducer, the weather is started, when the inducer is first sent in, and lasts until another inducer is sent in, or the battle ends, for whichever comes first. Of course, it's way too strong. So many Pokemon and abilities got banned just because of weather, and including a certain Pokemon that should still be banned. But I'm not going to come back to that. That's not the point. The point is that permanent weather seriously needs a redesign, especially now that it's been unleashed in the overused tier. So my suggestion, weather is started when the inducer is sent in and lasts until another inducer is sent in, or, whichever comes first once again, until 5 turns after the inducer is switched out. Of course, the 5 turns could be increased to 8 with held items such as the Damp Rock for rain, for example. So, yeah, basically, that's my idea. Whenever the inducer is switched back out, you're on a timer. You have so many turns to get to do something with that weather. Otherwise, you fail, and you're going to send out your inducer back in, if it's still alive, of course. So, I thought maybe about having the counter start when the inducer is first sent out, but that just might be overkill. I think my idea is a pretty good middle ground that's going to allow weather to remain viable while not keeping it in its current, obviously game-breaking state. And if that's still not enough, then you can always have the timer start when the inducer is first sent out in a later generation or something. Now, this probably doesn't this doesn't solve the problem of rain inherently being so much better than everything else from the start, but, I have no idea where things would go if such a change were implemented, so let's just wait and see if Game Freak is going to do something about it, or keep things as they are, which, knowing them, they will undoubtedly do. One thing, by the way, I don't know if we got many Uber players in here. This would affect Kyogre and Groudon as well, and severely change the landscape of the Uber metagame. It's always been all about weather, of course. Well, considering that the first 2 generations didn't have a proper Uber metagame because there weren't enough Ubers to begin with. So, yeah, I don't know how the Uber battling community would welcome such a change, but it's still going to stop the stranglehold Kyogre and Groudon have on that particular metagame, which is good in my opinion, because, well, of course, then that means Arceus gets an even bigger stranglehold, but, it's really no use really thinking about that unless a change is made, and as I said, I don't really expect anything in that department. Moving on to our next suggestion, because we've already spent quite a bit of time on this one. Number 11, redesign Airlock and Cloud9, because right now, they do next to nothing. What it does currently is that it allows the weather to continue, but its effects are cancelled until the user of Airlock or Cloud9 is switched out. So what this means is that, for example, if you have, say, Licky Licky out with Cloud9 and it's raining right now, It's still going to keep raining, but Thunder's accuracy is still going to be 70%, Swift Swim won't work, and so on. So, yeah, it really doesn't do a whole lot compared to what it's supposed to do, which should be, a way to trump weather altogether. So these abilities need a boost. So my suggestion, fairly obvious, weather stops altogether when the user is sent in and cannot be restarted as long as the user is on the field. Which also makes sense from a lore point of view, because Rayquaza is supposed to overpower Kyogre and Groudon and stop the effects of their weathers altogether. So from a lore standpoint, this makes sense. This is another one of my ideas to, prevent weather from being as good as it is. This would especially make a difference in Ubers where Rayquaza is actually, being used. And in overused, I don't know, maybe Licky Licky is going to become an anti-metagame Pokemon or something? Nah, probably not. It's just Licky Licky after all. But, yeah, that's still something that I think needs to be done, if only because it would be fully compatible with the lore, and because, well, it needs to do that. These abilities are supposed to be anti-weather, and yet they fail miserably at that. Number 12. Improve Kyurem's access to Reshiram's and Zekrom's signature moves. If you remember, back when Diamond and Pearl were brand new, Shaymin was a source of jokes and ridicule because it was so bad it had no moves whatsoever beyond Seed Flare. And when Platinum came out, it suddenly became a lot better because it gained access to a lot of moves that Sky Shaymin gave it as sort of hand-me-downs. So Land Shaymin actually became, well, it didn't become godly, but it at least became respectable. Unfortunately, Kyurem, well, normal Kyurem was never the sheer joke, Land Shaymin was, but for a Pokemon with a base stat total of 660, you certainly expect better than freaking Borderline. And that's mostly because of a rather shallow move pool, especially on the physical side. And then there's the fact that its typing is questionable, it's rather redundant offensively, and defensively, well, it contains ice, so it automatically has a steeper slope to climb. So, yeah, when Black and White 2 came out, I was expecting Kyurem to get some sort of hand-me-down from its alternate forms, which do get Fusion Flare and Fusion Bolt, but unfortunately, there's still no way for normal Kyurem to get them, because those moves are replaced whenever you change forms, which is a shame. So here's my suggestion in order to make things a little better, especially for normal Kyurem, though the other two forms could benefit from it a little as well. As things stand now, the normal form has none of the signature moves of Reshiram and Zekrom. Black Kyurem has Fusion Bolt, and White Kyurem has Fusion Flare. My idea is to make Fusion Bolt and Fusion Flare accessible at will by all three forms. This would especially benefit normal Kyurem, since it could stand to use some more attacks. Fusion Flare would be very useful for, taking out those pesky steel types, while Fusion Bolt would improve its paltry physical move pool. And as a result, I know the other two forms need to have something special over the normal form, not just in stats, but in terms of moves as well, which is why I would give Bolt Strike to Black Kyurem and Blue Flare to White Kyurem. Now, whether White Kyurem needs the help is debatable, considering it's already pretty strong as is, but I don't think anyone will argue that Black Kyurem desperately needs the help. I hear there are some communities where Black Kyurem is outright overused, not even Uber. So, that improvement, even if it's somewhat minor, the improvement from Fusion Bolt to Bolt Strike, it could still be very, very useful. Number 13. make Poison super effective against Steel and Dragon. This kind of change would be, well, to be honest, it would be pretty weird because the type chart has not changed at all since Generation 2. There were a few changes from the in the transition from Generation 1 to Generation 2, not including the introduction of the Dark and Steel types. For example, Poison was super effective against Bug in Generation 1. It stopped being so in Generation 2 because, Poison was already so overpowered in Generation 1. That was sarcasm, by the way. Generation 1 Poison, you can't get much worse than that in terms of types. If it was Poison, it was practically an instant disqualification. Don't ever use it. Except for Gengar, because it's a ghost, but that's another matter entirely. So, yeah, I think the time has come to make some minor adjustments to the type chart. Poison being super effective against Steel is something that has been argued by many people over the last couple years because it just makes sense, Hasn't Game Freak ever heard of corrosion or things like that? I think the logic behind Steel being immune to poison is that, robots aren't affected by poison as much as biological organisms would, I guess. I think that's what they were going for, but only a very small minority of Steel types are actually robotic. Most of them are just creatures with really thick hides, like, for example, Steelix and Excadrill, Aggron, stuff like that. So, changing Poison to be super effective against Steel, it does make sense from that standpoint, and it also makes sense from a balance standpoint because right now, Poison now defensively, it's somewhat respectable. It's weak to ground, but otherwise it has quite a few interesting resistances. It's just really, really bad offensively right now. It's only super effective against grass, and a whole lot of stuff resists poison, and Steel is immune outright. Meanwhile, Steel is the definitive defensive typing. If you got the Steel type and your second type's not like Rock or something, then you're all set, I guess. So yeah, this is something that really would be interesting to make one of the worst offensive types very good against one of the best defensive types. And as for Dragon, well, there's no real logic to that one. It would purely be a balancing move. Like, there are several things in the type chart that are either big stretches or don't make much logical sense at all. They're just there for balancing purposes. Making Poison super effective against Dragon would be one such move. I mean, it's really hard to argue that dragons aren't, well, maybe not overpowered, but they are definitely really, really, really strong right now. Maybe part of it is because Game Freak goes out of its way to make most dragons good from the get-go. The only ones that I wouldn't be caught dead using are Altaria and Drudigon. But other than that, all of the dragons range from very respectable to, Uber, because we haven't had non-dragon Uber mascots since Kyogre and Groudon, so yeah, that's been a while. So this is why I would also buff Poison a bit and bring Dragon maybe a little bit further down by making Poison super effective against Dragon. I also thought of bringing back its super effectiveness against Bug, but I don't think that would be necessary as much as against those other two types, because these two types are just among the best in the game, and Bug doesn't really need the nerf right now.